All right. Great to see you all this morning. We've heard about one of the topics, and we'll get to that, but two topics that we get a little uncomfortable on a Sunday morning when we hear they might be the topic. And we think that maybe they shouldn't even be topics on Sunday morning. Maybe we should deal with them another way. And the first topic that we really don't want to hear about on Sunday morning is sex. Right? I mean, you're thinking, that isn't what we're talking about today, right? But we don't like to hear about it. We're thinking, like, really, is there a place for that on Sunday morning? Is it something we should be talking about? Maybe it should be talked about in another venue or another arena or another setting. Yet, as I've counseled for years on that topic, married couples don't even talk about it. Right? It's a topic that we just don't talk about in the church, yet it's a topic we should be talking about in the church. And then the second one is money, which Marissa's introduced, and we've talked a little bit about this morning. And really what we begin to hear on that one, and I've heard a lot as a pastor, is, well, the church just wants your money. And so if they're going to talk about it, they're going to talk about it in a way that you need to give more. Or you need to sacrifice more to be able to give more. You need to spend less here or there so you can give more, so we can pay that guy's salary or pay those bills or whatever it might be. And again, another topic that, as I talk to married couples, rarely gets discussed. Right? As a matter of fact, two of the top three reasons people get divorced are sex and money. The third's in-laws, but we won't go there at all. Right, these two significant topics that the church needs to talk about. But what the church also likes to do, right, denominations, pastors, churches, is we like to pick passages about sex or passages about money and frame a theology around them so we can get you to do certain things. Right? We like to do that, right, as a church and say, here's the ones we're going to grab about sex, and we're going to put those here, and you all need to, here's the theology. And here's all these ones about money, the few we're going to pick, and here's our theology. And we do things like that when we proof text, right? Pick passages to prove a point I want to prove. Right? We miss the whole counsel of God. And so our struggle, our challenge, right, in addressing a topic like this, especially from the Proverbs, is there's a whole bunch of Proverbs that deal with money. And a lot of them seem to not make sense. A lot of them seem really not even to be valid and true. And then others, man, I really could wrap my head around that one and really preach one point about that, right, and say, this is our theology. This is what you need to do because this two-line thing says it. First, and so I'm going to go through some Proverbs and draw attention to some that's really good, and just a couple others that, like, really, does that really play all the time, right? Just so we can begin to get an understanding, and then we're going to hit a spot where we're going to look at what the writer of the Proverbs and many writers might be saying to us. Okay? So just a couple of Proverbs here. I'm not sure. I mean, really, are they true? Do they work? But first, Proverbs aren't promises from God. Okay, they're principles. So we want to hear that. Right? Don't read a proverb and say, God's made that promise to me. They're not promises. Right? They're wisdom literature being shared from generation to generation to be able to use in a wise way. Proverbs 10:4 says, lazy people are soon poor. Hard workers get rich. I know some people that work their tails off that are never going to get rich. Does this fit? Does it work? Proverbs 13:4, lazy people want much but get little, but those who work hard will prosper. Well, that really works when I'm trying to preach a prosperity gospel, right? And you're not making enough, or you don't seem to have enough, you're not working hard enough. Because the proverb says that if you work hard, you're going to prosper, but I know specifically some people who work their tails off much harder than me, they're never going to prosper. And you could tell people in third world countries who are working for pennies a day, they will never prosper. 17:5, this seems to be a good one. Those who mock the poor insult their maker. Those who rejoice at the misfortune of others will be punished. I'd like to believe that. I see some mock poor and rejoice at others' misfortune. I don't see much punishment, but I want to believe that could happen, right? 22:2, really good. The rich and poor have this in common. The Lord made them both. Okay, that seems to track pretty good. Proverbs 1:19, such is the fate of all who are greedy. It robs them of life. Well, I don't know. I see some pretty wealthy people seem to be enjoying themselves. I don't know. Proverbs 11:28, trust in your money and down you go, but the godly flourish like leaves in a spring. Okay, again, trust in your money and down you go. I don't know. There's some folks that seem to acquire a lot, seem to have a lot, and seem to be on top a lot. Interesting. Give freely and become more wealthy. That's a good one we could preach. Be stingy and lose everything. Matter of fact, let's make that the sermon today. Let's pick that one proverb and make this the one. Give freely and become more wealthy. Good prosperity stuff there. The generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. And finally, true humility and fear of the Lord lead to riches, honor, and long life. I don't know. I know some folks that love Jesus and died young. Right, so we get it here. I'm going to bring this all together, but right as we read these, it would be easy to pick and choose, and some of these that just don't seem to track all the time, but to say like, look, let's make this my thing, right? Let's say let's talk about generous people will prosper. Let's find the 4 proverbs that go with that, make that our point, and say that's what we expect. Or maybe there's something else going on in all of these proverbs that God might want us to know. And then if we see what Jesus says, right? If we took a look at the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6, I would encourage you to take a look at chapter 6 in Matthew. Jesus says, hey, don't store up treasures on earth, right? Where moth can destroy them and rust will destroy them. Store up treasures in heaven. Essentially live a godly life. Do things as Jesus would want you to do them. And then he says, but don't worry about life. Don't worry about your meals. Don't worry about clothing. Don't worry about those things. If you trust God in all the little things, God will take care of all that for you. So don't worry. Store up treasures in heaven. And then kind of sums that whole section up by saying you can't serve 2 masters, either God or it's money. What's your choice? Which master are you going to choose? And then later, in a couple of the Gospels, Jesus says to a person, hey, sell everything, give it to the poor, and follow me. Maybe we should preach that today. We all should go sell everything. Right? My point is, and you know this about me, I hate taking passages out of context. I hate when people proof text. I had 2 discussions this week about it, about my friend and I talking about something, and we started talking theology, and we kind of agreed on this point, and he started to share about someone he believes who disagreed with us, but proof text, right? Picks the few passages to make their point. Bothers me. We don't want to fall into that trap, right? The Bible is yes, it is a love story that God has for us, that God loves us. But man, letters were written for specific people at specific times, for specific moments in the New Testament. Same with the Old Testament, specific things being addressed. And so we want to make sure we just don't grab a passage and form a theology. We want to make sure we look at the whole counsel. So is there a passage in Proverbs that might do that? Strangely enough, there is a passage in Proverbs that does that. It's the last chapter of Proverbs. Now, we normally hear this chapter, Proverbs 31, in reference to the Proverbs 31 woman, don't we? You might have heard a sermon on that. You might have read a book on that. You might have done a Bible study on this Proverbs 31 woman. I want to suggest to you something a bit different about that, okay? First off, in chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs, right, we saw wisdom personified, didn't we? And we said wisdom was personified as a female. And I didn't give a good explanation. I said there's multiple explanations why. Number one being wisdom is a feminine word in Hebrew, and so it makes sense if you're going to personify wisdom to call her a she. There's other reasons, but it's personified wisdom as a woman. If we look at Proverbs 31, Maybe we could look at Proverbs 31 as wisdom not being personified, but wisdom being embodied now as a woman. And what Proverbs 31 becomes is an embodiment, a summary, essentially, of what it looks like to live a wise life. And when we begin to look at Proverbs 31 as an embodiment of wisdom, what it might look like to live a life of wisdom, and we just don't use she, but we use he, or we use and think about it in reference to all of us, we begin to see a picture essentially of all that Proverbs may be trying to teach us, even with money. Another thing that's intriguing that you don't see in your English Bible is there's 33 verbs from verse 10 down to the end. I don't know how many verses, verse 10 down to the end of 31. You will read them, my guess is, in your English translation as present tense verbs. In actuality, all 33 of those verbs are in the Hebrew past tense. There's 3 different types of verbs here. 2 are definitely always used in the past tense. The last one, sometimes past present. But these verbs are in the past tense. So what we have here, what we're reading essentially, is whether you're going to read it as a Proverbs 31 woman or the embodiment of wisdom for all of us, essentially is a Lifetime Achievement Award. What it looks like, right, to live a life well lived. This isn't a picture of someone has done this their entire existence, right, and is doing this every single day. This is a picture of someone who has lived a life well, embodying the wisdom teachings and wisdom sayings. Does that make sense? Does it make sense? I want us to make sure we get that because it would be easy to read it as, oh my gosh, who could live up to this? And by the way, the church has abused, I'm not suggesting our church, the church has abused Proverbs 31. It's held it over women. Like, are you doing this? Are you like this? Do you manage a household like this? Are you this kind of wife? Are you this kind of mom? And it's held it up to men to say, are you looking for this kind of woman? When in no way is it meant for that. We're reading about a lifetime achievement of living a wise life. Do we get that? So significant we understand that because this is a text that has been proof texted way too much by Christians. And we don't want to do that. So we're going to look at a few verses. So we're going to jump down. You can jump down. We're not going to read all of Proverbs 31. I want to deal specifically with the ones dealing with money. And you're going to hear the life lesson come out immediately. Okay? It's going to be immediate. So go to Proverbs 31:16. I'm going to be reading from the New Living Translation. I've really loved that as we've gone through the Proverbs. Verse 16, chapter 31 says, she goes to inspect a field and buys it. So she just doesn't spend her money willy-nilly. She just doesn't, send someone else. She goes and she inspects the field prior to her buying it. So we get this idea that wisdom embodied, living out wisdom in a way that deals with money, says I'm intentional in things dealing with my finances. And the second part of this, very intriguing what is not said but what is said. With her earnings, she plants a vineyard. With money she already has, she deals with the vineyard. She grows a vineyard, which would suggest, right, if you know what the underlying thing in the Proverbs is she's not taking a loan. Right? She's dealing with money she has to grow another crop. She's dealing with money she has to buy whatever she needs to buy to plant the vineyard. She's using what she already has. Again, she is intentional in how she uses her finances. Jump down to verse 18. She makes sure her dealings are profitable. She's on top of whatever dealings they are, right? Whether she's buying something, selling something, she's on top of her dealings, which again says what? She's intentional. She understands what she has. She understands what she needs. And she makes sure that in each of these ways, they are profitable. Verse 19. Her hands are busy spinning thread, her fingers twisting fiber. Now, this is going to come out a little bit farther down why this is so important, but this is significant as well, right? She works here with intention. She's specifically doing something, making sure she's spinning thread, twisting fiber, and we're going to figure out why here in a couple verses down, why. But this is a significant aspect of her intentionality, right? She's not afraid to do work. She's not afraid to get done what needs to get done. Verse 20. I love the way the NLT puts this. She extends a helping hand to the poor. What does that mean? It means she goes to the poor. Okay, so she sees where there's a need and she extends a hand, whatever that hand is, to those who are in need. But she also, the NLT says, has open arms to the needy. I love the contrast of that, right? I go to where there's a need, but I'm open to receive from those who have a need, right? So I don't just sit back and say, they can come to me, I'm not going. No, I go where I see needs to meet needs, but I'm open to those who have a need coming to me to fulfill that need. Okay? So she's a giver. She cares for people, takes care of people. Verse 21, which now comes from 19, she has no fear of winter for her household, for everyone has warm clothes. Why? Because she prepared, because she was intentional, because she knew that in fall, winter was next. Right? Winter's coming. And so if winter's coming, I need to get prepared for what's next. And so I'll do the work necessary to be prepared for the next season. And so therefore, I don't need to have fear. Fear is an important word here because it's going to be the kicker at the end here. But she's like, I don't, the proverb writer says this person has no fear for her household because she's been intentional and she's prepared for what is about to come. Verse 25. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs. It's an intriguing way of putting it, without fear of the future. Well, as I'm tracking this entire embodiment of wisdom, right, what do I see? I see intentionality, I see preparation, I see forethought, I see someone who understands the big picture but understands the smaller picture. And so why do I have to have fear of the future? Now, we're going to get the final reason why this person doesn't have fear of the future, but they have used their brain they've been given, the gifts they've been given, the talents they've been given to be intentional and prepared for whatever might come before them. And so I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to have fear about it. And then the kicker in verse 30. Charm is deceptive, beauty does not last. Okay, we can set those aside. But a woman who fears the Lord will be greatly praised. A woman who has reverence for God, a woman who puts God number one in her life, a person who puts God number one in her life will be greatly praised. The reason this person who embodies wisdom is praised isn't because they give to the needy, isn't because they've been intentional in their buying of fields or planting of vineyards or use their earnings to take a loan. The reason they'll be greatly praised is because they love God. It's beautiful, isn't it? This steps through all of this embodiment of wisdom, what it looks like to be wise, what it looks like to put the Proverbs into practice. But at the end, the number one thing here, the number one reason this woman is praised or this person is praised is because they love Yahweh. Yahweh is number one in their life. And out of that flows the desire to be intentional, flows the desire to be prepared, flows the desire to not be willy-nilly and let it come as it comes, right? Flows a desire to not have to be concerned or worry because God is number one. And what I love about this too, right? I think a lot of folks will sit, right, the story of the guy in the house in the flood, and he dies, he drowns, and he says, hey, God, you didn't show up. And God's like, I sent a guy in a boat, I sent a guy in a helicopter. I said, right? Sometimes we just sit and say, I'm just waiting on God, I'm just waiting on God. And God's like, I gave you a brain and some gifts and talents. Use them. That's this wisdom. This woman has been given, or this person has been given gifts and talents, and in the understanding to prepare, the understanding to be intentional, the understanding to be wise with their finances, the understanding with their dealings, all of those things Given from God as a gift in their DNA? Given from God as they pursued God, or just in the brain that they have, and the talents that they were given? You know, I think it's easy to sit and to say, well, what is this really? I mean, I didn't hear you really tell me what to do with my money. Right? You didn't give me step 1, step 2, step 3, because we're step 1, step 2, step 3 people, aren't we? We like that. And that's kind of how we want to read the Bible. It's like, okay, where's the step 1? There's step 1. And that's how we like to teach it and receive it. Is step 1, step 2, step 3. Life's good. Follow those steps. Beautiful. Well, life's a little more complicated at times, isn't it? And the principle that I see coming out of this, right, of this idea of what's happening is this idea of intentionality. Now, it would be easy, for those of you who are highly intentional, you're sitting there thinking like, well, who isn't? But you will be surprised at how many people have no idea how much money they have, how much money they spend. Some people don't even know how much money they make. Right? It just gets direct deposited. I spend, there's nothing left. I wait till the next deposit, right? Not planning for this, right? You would be surprised at the lack of intentionality that exists if you're one of those highly intentional people, which, by the way, that's a few people. But the significance of being intentional with my finances in the midst of pursuing God. Is this a promise that if I'm intentional, I'm going to be rich? No way. Is this a promise that if I'm intentional, I'm going to have everything I ever wanted? Not a chance. That's not the point, remember? That's not the point of what's happening here. It's not like, because that's the way we think too, like, right, if I do it the right way, life's going to go good for me. If I do it the right way, I'm going to be rich. It's not the point. The point is, am I being greatly praised for loving God and pursuing God? And then am I using the brain and the wisdom that I've gathered to be intentional as God would have me be intentional? And guess what? So how many people are here? Looks different, for the most part, for every single one of us. Of what that looks like. Of how that gets lived out. Of how that plays out. I just share this as just testimony of how this works for me, okay? And this will tell you what I value. is sometimes people will ask, like, what are your hobbies? And I'm like, I don't have any. I have one hobby. And that's to travel. That's it. So I don't do all kinds, Cindy and I don't do hardly any other stuff. We don't spend money on any other thing so we can take 2 to 3 trips a year. That's what we want to do. Even when God pulled me out of corporate America and stuck me in a pastor, and we're like, that's what you make as a pastor? That's ridiculous. We're like, we got to be intentional. Right? We have to be intentional. So we don't spend here, so we can do this thing that we really like to do, right? So we all can make those decisions. And chatting with people through the week and actually having a conversation with Marissa recently, like there was a season where you had to be intentional about college savings. There was a season where we had to be intentional with Cindy getting a 9-to-5 job to help pay for college. There's seasons of that intentionality if I'm looking at it that way. If my sole intention is I got to save enough until I retire so I can, right? I mean, that's intention. But am I taking that with God as the reason in the one I'm following? Am I allowing God to dictate? Am I allowing God to kind of roll with me on that? If God said, hey, Evans, trips are over, I need you to have intention somewhere else, would I listen to that? Would I be like, okay, yeah, if God's leading me that way, that must be what it is. So are we always taking this idea of what we have and what we're working hard or not so hard? Some of us work harder than others, right? Are we taking that and putting it before the Lord and saying, what do you want? There were seasons in my life where we didn't give. It was like God's like, man, you're barely surviving. I'll take care of that. Don't worry about that. There'll be a time where you'll be able to give in abundance again. There were seasons where we could give a bunch. Seasons where we saved a bunch. Seasons where we couldn't save a dime. But am I taking it before God with intention? That's what I see here in this Proverbs 31 embodiment of what it looks like. and as my own testimony of life, as I've seen that in my own life, and as I've talked to people who I look at and say, wow, I feel like they're living with the Lord in a way that's amazing, and they're intentional with every aspect of their lives, and to listen to their wisdom, it's remarkable, right? And the freedom of that. Marissa's been talking about freedom, and in the songs we sing dealing with that freedom, right? The freedom isn't that I'm independently wealthy. That's not the freedom. The freedom isn't that there's months we don't struggle. The freedom is trusting God in that pursuit of whatever He's up to in our lives. The freedom is saying, Jesus, it's yours anyway. I'm going to follow wherever you might want to take and trust you to feed me and clothe me and house me and shelter me and give me some trips, right? The freedom in trusting God in that. But God's like, Evans, you got a brain. Be intentional in how you make, how you save, how you spend, how you give. In all those ways. So my challenge to us, when it comes to money, right? We're all in a different spot here, aren't we? We're all in a different spot even. Some have a bunch, some don't have much, some are struggling, some aren't. Right? We're all in a very different spot. Just ask the Lord, like, Lord, is there ways you want me to be more intentional in this? Are there ways you want me to change what I've been doing? Are there ways you would like me to grow? Is there someone in the congregation you want me to seek wisdom from? Is there someone in my family you'd like me to talk to? Is to take it before the Lord. Say, what would you have me do? How would you like me to move forward in this matter? Because honestly, what this person is doing, they're honoring God with their life, aren't they? This person in Proverbs 31 is honoring God in the totality of their life. And then finally, last bit of encouragement for us. We spend a lot of time praising our favorite athletes. We spend a lot of time praising the wealthy or the rich. We spend a lot of time praising people or the right career. Maybe we should look around and start praising people for their love for Jesus. That's why this woman is greatly praised. That's why this person is greatly praised. We see that in one another. Praise each other about it. We see each other being obedient to what God's doing. Praise each other about it. Say thank you to one another about living life in the presence of the Spirit in pursuit of Christ. So Marissa and Gary and Jimmy are going to come. A great song. I mean, they've been singing great songs this morning. Oh, come to the altar. We don't do this often, but I want to invite you to come to the altar this morning. For whatever reason God might have placed on you in this entire service may have nothing to do with money. But maybe God's just saying, hey, the exercise is to get out of your seat and come to stand or come to kneel at the altar. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe you want prayer this morning. I'll be up here up front. Come down and ask for prayer. Just say, man, would you just pray for me or with me? Maybe God leads you to go pray for someone else even. The point, respond to the Holy Spirit this morning, however the Holy Spirit is leading you. Let's pray. Man, Lord, thank you for this amazing embodiment of wisdom that we see in Proverbs 31. What it may look like, what it does look like to live a life in reverence of you, seeking out what you have for us, seeking out how you might be leading us. Whether it's in how much money we make, how much money we save, how much money we give, how much we spend on our hobbies, how much we give to our grandkids, whatever it might be, God, we want you to lead us. In those moments where we don't hear, like you haven't laid out our financial plan for us, may we be intentional in our decision making with purpose and wisdom as we live a life fully devoted to you. In Jesus' name.